Welcome everyone to the Onboarding Regional Data Training webinar hosted by Jay Wright from CASAS. My name is Liberty Van Atten and I'm the Project Specialist for the California Adult Education Program Technical Assistance Project. The recording of this webinar and the presentation slides are available for download on the California Adult Education Program website. If ever there is a need for technical assistance or professional development, please contact TAP by email at tap@aebg.org or by phone at 888-827-2324. You can also submit a support request at caladulted.org/tap. So now I'm going to hand things over to Jay to get things started.
Okay, hello everybody. This is a recording of the AEP data-specific training. It's a portion of the regional training that I've been doing with Neil Kelly for the last two and a half years. To be clear, this will focus mostly on the side that I have been doing over the last couple years. That is the CASAS TE statewide data collection requirements. There are some state level issues that appear in another training, but this will focus on all the things related to that data specific training. So here is the agenda. We'll look at, the AEP reporting overview. We'll review AB 104 outcomes, which comprise all of the things we're recording in AEP data. We'll look at some key questions that come up quite a bit when we look at these specific outcomes. Then we'll also look at the requirement to collect short-term services. We'll then follow up with some common questions that relate to short-term services. Then we'll look at some of the reports in TE, that is TOPS Pro Enterprise. That is the system that most of you are using to record this data. And then we'll look at a couple key features. No, this will not be a training that digs into the TE software, but two important features about TE reports that are good to know right off the bat. Number one, that is the drill down capacity that you have with both AEP reports and TE and all reports in TE overall. And then there's also a feature where you can log in at the consortium level rather than the agency level. Those last two bullets, we will not get into all the gory detail, but we will at least make you aware that these features exist so you can then follow up and take a look at it. So without further ado, let's start with our AEP outcomes. So to be clear, in the adult education program, we have 6 areas of outcomes stipulated by the California legislature. This slide shows you exactly what those are. You can see literacy gains, secondary, post-secondary, employment, wages, and transition. We have a certain number of outcomes that we've aligned to each of those 6 categories. This slide is basically summarizing all of the different areas that the state acknowledges as an official student outcome for the adult education program. Looking at this is another slide looking at the exact same information we saw in the previous slide. You can see down at the bottom there are those same 6 areas of AB 104, the same 6 categories that we have color-coded. This slide is a screenshot of the CASAS update record, that is the answer sheet we use for Enterprise. To be clear, this answer sheet is used for scanning. Some agencies do scanning, probably the majority of agencies do not do scanning anymore, but we've used this as a screenshot just to show what I like to call the translation sheet between the WIOA outcomes we have on this answer sheet versus the areas that we've looked at for AB 104. I'm going to go back up a step and show this is showing you the official outcomes as defined by the legislature. Again, the legislature defined the 6 areas. The AEP office got more specific to identify specific outcomes for each of these 6 areas. So what we did 2 or 3 years ago, 2017, is we looked at all of the outcomes that the state office, desired to have as outcomes. We looked at the outcomes we had in Enterprise for WIOA, and the word I've been using is retrofit. That is, we retrofitted federal WIOA outcomes to more specific statewide outcomes we identified for AEP. This is the laundry list format you see on the first slide. Moving back to that answer sheet slide, what we did is we looked at specific checkboxes and bubbles in the TOPS Pro Enterprise software And again, I'll use that word, we retrofitted those WIOA outcomes to the more specific statewide outcomes. Predictably, when we started doing this, that caused a great deal of confusion statewide. So we've used this answer sheet screenshot to show you here are the specific bubbles you need to mark on the answer sheet to make sure that that outcome you mark on the update record corresponds to one of those official AEP outcomes number 1, and that it corresponds to the specific AB 104 outcome number 2. So to use this, you can see we color coded it using the 6 different colors on the bottom, aligning it to each of those 6 areas of AB 104, and marked it accordingly here on field 9 of the update record, where we include all of those official outcomes. So for example, the top one, got a job, is coded in blue. If you look down at the bottom, you can see the blue outcomes, predictably enough, relate to employment outcomes. So that shows you whenever you bubble got a job on the CASAS update record, that will successfully correspond to an employment outcome for AB 104/AEP reporting. You can see we have the 6 different colors aligning to the 6 different areas. So if you get confused about which specific things to mark on this form and how to make sure it corresponds to the correct area in AB 104, you can use the color coding on this slide to help you get through it. Similarly, next slide, again, exact same information, but a different way of using this resource. In this case, we're giving you screenshots directly from the TE software. So this relates to if you need to mark it directly in the software rather than using the answer sheet or bubble form. So in this case, we once again coded those 6 areas of AB 104. In this case, we used letter coding rather than the color coding on the previous slide. You can see again, we used a different letter for each of the 6 areas of AB 104. Just so you can make sense out of this screenshot, you can see this middle screenshot is basically from the menu item in TE, Record Student Records. Record Student Records is the area on the TE menu where you need to go in order to find the aspect in TE that has all of these specific menu options. So that middle screenshot is exactly what it will look like in the TE software. What we did is we just blew up those 2 areas. You can see we blew up that little screenshot called work results so you can see the specific listings more easily. At the bottom, we blew up that section called education results so you can see those outcomes more easily. And just like we did with the color coding on the previous slide, we letter coded each one that corresponded to the 6 areas. So just another way, another reference for you to make sure that you're marking these outcomes correctly and making sure what you mark in the TE software correctly corresponds to that particular aspect of AB 104. Okay, here's a third way to basically get at the same info. This is just an Excel spreadsheet. So this is, what you might call a translation form here, where we have the category name to the left. So in the left-hand column, that's showing which one of those 6 areas of AB 104 we're talking about. Then in the middle column, we're giving the specific title. We've given that outcome for AEP reporting. And then in the right-hand column, we basically gave the bubble or the checkbox in TE with the name that we necessarily include in TE for official federal reporting purposes, and basically show which federal reporting title corresponds to the state reporting title we need for AEP. So just looking at the top one, we have the literacy gains category. That is the literacy gains area of those 6 related to AB 104. And then we're looking at the specific outcome name, in this case, occupational skills gain. If we want to record an AEP occupational skills gain outcome, we can bubble on the form either work-based project goal or training milestone. I'll just double back. You can use either of those 2 titles directly in the TE software from this screenshot. Or, you can use the specific answer sheet bubble on this screenshot, depending on exactly how you're recording your data. But either one of those bubbles and or either one of those checkboxes will successfully correspond to your recording an occupational skills gain. So you can see we have that translation sheet for all the 6 areas of AB 104 listed in this fashion as well. So again, 3 different ways of looking at what's in TE and having it successfully correspond to the outcomes you need to be recording for AEP reporting. Okay, looking at it in a little bit more depth. For literacy gains, we have 5 different gains. We have the most common one that relates to pre and post testing. We also have Carnegie units. We have a certificate on the college side, and then we have 2 outcomes for CTE called occupational skills gain and workforce preparation. What we're showing over here to the right is, we're corresponding that AEP outcome to the specific area, of reporting in TE. What I'll bring up is some of these outcomes are simply met by marking one of those bubbles or check boxes, in Enterprise. Some of those are done some other way. This is basically showing you how to record each one. Kind of starting at the top, pre and post testing is the most obvious. You can never really mark a pre-post gain by bubbling a bubble or checking a checkbox. That's obviously done by doing the pre-testing and the post-testing. There's another outcome called Carnegie units that's a special self-reported level slide. And then the other 3 areas of literacy gains, which we've kind of retrofitted for other areas, are marked by the bubble or checkbox like we showed on those previous slides. Looking at a few areas of concern with literacy gains, we'll start with the high school credits outcome. So for high school credits, this is basically an alternative way to mark that the individual has made some sort of gain, related to their particular program. So digressing just a little bit, I'll back up a slide with literacy gains. What the literacy gains area of AEP reporting corresponds to is what the feds would call measurable skills gains, or MSG. That is, at the federal level, when you're looking at all the outcomes we're using to successfully report student, gains and so on, the way the feds and the state are mostly concerned with these gains is by looking at the quote-unquote final prize. So by saying final prize, what I mean by that is, things that you can tangibly measure, in terms of student progress, things like get a job, make a pay raise, earn your high school diploma, enroll in college, get a job, and so on. That is, all of the things that are really easy to measure. For most of what we do for state reporting and federal reporting, those final prize outcomes are what the state and the feds are mostly concerned with. However, we've known for a long time at the state and the federal level, if we rely exclusively on those quote-unquote final prize outcomes, a lot of the time we're going to shortchange ourselves and shortchange our students, because we know the majority of our students are probably not going to gain those final prize outcomes within a year, because many of those final prize outcomes take much longer than a year to achieve. Getting a job, getting a pay raise, completing your GED or diploma, completing college, getting your occupational licensure, and so on. Most of those final prize outcomes take more than a year to achieve. So what the feds and the state have done is looking at different ways to show these outcomes, so we can show that the student is making great progress even though the student has not been in our program long enough to get final prize outcomes such as high school diploma or get a job. So one obvious way we measure that is through pre and post testing. That is, we have a student in ABE or in GED or in ESL, they haven't gotten a job or completed their diploma yet, but they have, shown that they've done an outstanding job, because we can see they've made outstanding progress in their CASAS pre and post testing. So that's, you might say, is a really obvious way that we measure measurable skills gains, without necessarily relying on the final prize. What we've done over the last few years is looked at other areas beyond just pre and post testing to show that the student has done a really good job, even though they may not have achieved that final prize. So moving back to this slide, this literacy gains high school credits outcome is a way to look at measurable skills gains for high school diploma students, only instead of looking at this measurable skills gain through pre and post testing, we're using high school credits. So at the federal level, what they're saying is the student advances from the 9th or 10th grade high school level to the 11th or 12th grade high school level within a year using high school credits. So this is showing you a screenshot in Enterprise where we're showing how to mark the student from ASE low, which from the federal level is the 9th or 10th grade level, to ASE high, which at the federal, outcome is the 11th or 12th grade level. So in this case, if the student makes gains, you can mark ASE low upon enrollment, and then once the student gets over halfway through credits to get the 11th or 12th grade level, you can mark ASE high to show that progress. Another way to show measurable skills gain is through CTE. So for ESL and ABE, we have a way through pre and post testing. For high school diploma, we have a way to show it through high school credits. For career and technical education, we have a way to show it, through what we call occupational skills gain or workforce prep outcome. These are just ways that the state has retrofitted CTE activities in the form of a measurable skills gain, so we're not relying on that occupational certificate or occupational licensure, to show gain. So looking at it here, we'll show, those two outcomes. Generally people understand the fact that we're looking at measurable skills gain for career tech ed pretty well, but keeping the two straight can be very difficult. So what we've said over the last year or two is the way to keep them straight is when you're looking at occupational skills gain, you're suggesting an accomplishment of the portion of a longer term program. If you're looking at a workforce prep milestone, you're basically saying you're completing a shorter term program. So looking at high school occupational skills gain, again, the example we're looking at here is we'll say that we have a CTE student that's enrolling in a long-term welding program. We're just using this as an example, but just saying, we'll say that that longer-term program in this example is 5 semesters long. So what we might say is in that CTE program, if you're like most programs, you're likely to have some kind of skills check, written exam, or something that basically shows that that student has progressed as they move along from module to module or semester to semester. So in this example, we'll say the student completed the first module or semester. They're at the end of that semester. So you give them that skills check or that CASAS pre and post test or that written exam that you made up. Once the student passes that exam and is ready to move out of module 1 and into module 2, that's an example where you can successfully record an occupational skills gain for that student. What I'll just say is historically we've kind of said it doesn't matter exactly what that student does to achieve occupational skills gain. At the start of this 2018-19 program year, we added the extra bullet to say you need to have some kind of exam that the student passes in order for them to get the occupational skills gain. It's up to you how you administer that exam. If you want to use CASAS pre and post testing, that's a good way to do it. If you want to make up your own exam, that's fine as well. If you feel like career tech ed is better suited for practical skills checks rather than written exams, that's also okay. But we do say that the student should pass some sort of exam in order for you to mark that occupational skills gain. That's as opposed to the workforce prep outcome that suggests some kind of completion of a longer term program. So in this case, we'll say that the student enrolls in a short term 15-hour class on job search strategies, and they earn an informal certificate. It's way too short to be anything formal or anything, that they're going to actually use to get a job. But hey, you did have the short-term program. They did, stick around to complete all 15 hours. So you don't really have a formal certification for this, but they completed the short-term program. So here's an example where you can mark that workforce prep milestone. So again, occupational skills gain, partial completion of a longer program, workforce prep milestone, full completion of a shorter program. Okay, here's another source of confusion, another way of looking at these outcomes. So we're looking at literacy gains, showing the difference between occupational skills gain and workforce prep milestone. Now we're looking at the difference between those two areas of literacy gains and when these workforce outcomes turn into a full-fledged post-secondary outcome. Short answer is for both state AEP reporting and for federal reporting, when we're reporting a gain under post-secondary, that suggests an outcome that's a little bit more significant than a mere measurable skills gain. So for AEP, here's how we're doing it. So first off, for post-secondary, these 3 bullets, here are the 3 bullets in post-secondary that pertain to workforce. Making another long story short, when we're looking at post-secondary outcomes at the state and federal level, some of those outcomes relate to entering college, others of those relate to, career tech ed sort of outcomes. So we have the 3 post-secondary outcomes that relate to workforce versus those 2 areas of literacy gains that we've marked for AP that also relate to workforce. So again, for starters, we're looking at the literacy gain. We just showed those 2 outcomes under literacy gains. One of them, occupational skills gains, suggests partial completion of a longer term program. The other one, workforce prep milestone, suggests completion of a shorter term program. If we're marking one of these 3 that we list under post-secondary, on the other hand, that suggests full completion of a longer-term program. So again, short answer is if we mark something under post-secondary, again, that suggests something a little bit more significant for that student than one of those 2 that we just explained under literacy gains. Okay, so moving on here, we're going to look at the transition outcomes. Again, transition comprises one of those 6 categories under AB 104. That is one of those 6 categories that comprise the 6 areas for statewide AEP reporting. So this suggests the student transitioned out of your adult education program and moved in to something either internally or externally, that is something internally or externally more significant. So one of these is an internal transition. That's the top one, transition to ASE. The others, you might say, are more quote-unquote external in nature. So the internal one to ASE, that means the student is starting in either ABE or an ESL and finishes the year in either high school equivalency or high school diploma. You might say that suggests an internal transition where they just move to a higher level program because it's an internal transition. You're not really marking anything specifically. That's all under the hood. TE will record that automatically. But if the student happens to transition from ABE or ESL and finishes the year in high school equivalency or high school diploma, just FYI, that's an informal, that's an under the hood transition. Okay, moving along here, the external transitions are to CTE in college. Before we get into the details of what the student does programmatically, I'll just show this is another area where we've retrofitted specific bubbles in the TE software and on the answer sheet. So you can see there's a few things you can mark to show transition to career tech ed. The bottom row shows you a couple things you can mark to show transition to college. Okay, here's a diagram that shows you how to record those transitions. So you can see the starting points are in blue in those boxes to the left. The end points are in red in those 3 boxes to the right. So to be clear, for transition, we're basically starting in either K-12 adult education, ABE, ASE, or ESL, or non-credit community college, ABE, ASE, or ESL. So either one of those is going to be the starting point for any of these transition outcomes. To make the transition to CTE, you need to transition from either of those starting points to either K-12 adult education career tech ed or community college career tech ed. If you end at either one of those places, that will successfully transition the student to CTE. Or you can end, if you want to get to college, you would end up in 4-credit community college. So again, you can start in K-12 adult ed or non-credit community college and end up in 4-credit community college. That will enable you to transition to college. I'll just point out that this is a little bit tricky because we've gone out of our way at the state level to distinguish between non-credit community college and 4-credit community college. If the students in K-12 adult ed and non-credit community college know that's not a transition, that's considered more of a lateral transfer, not a full-fledged transition, the student needs to move into 4-credit community college to have it successfully comprise a transitions outcome. Okay, that summarizes all the different areas with outcomes. Again, we listed out the outcomes in general terms, and then we clarified not everything, but we did get into details in the areas over the last couple years in which we've repeatedly, fielded lots of questions. We'll now do the same thing with short-term services. So to be clear, we have full-fledged outcomes, and then we have shorter services that we also, record. To be clear, in the services category, we're looking at, more short term, usually just 1 or 2 hour contacts with the student. It does not require that they enroll in a class. It does not require any formal training. It's usually something very short term, like a counseling session, a short term training, maybe mentorship services or something like that, that's received outside the classroom. And again, it is usually much, much shorter term than the outcomes we just got through defining. So again, we've got 3 types of services for the record: supportive services, training services, and transition services. Okay, so before we get into defining these services, we'll just show in Enterprise, there's 2 different ways to record services. If you want to record them directly in the TE software, that's another one where we once again go to the Records, Students, In-Program Years menu in TE. That's the menu destination in the software. We'll find this little screenshot where you can check any of the short-term services that apply to that specific student. If you prefer to scan this in, you can use Field 8 on the update record. There's just a simple field called Services Received where you can mark one of those 3 categories. To be clear, if you want to mark the very specific service, you need to go directly into the TE software. If you go directly into the TE software, you can see you have a large number of services from which to choose, and you can mark that very specific service received by the student. If you want to scan it using the update record, you can still record the service. You will still be in full compliance if you just mark it this way. But to be clear, if you do scanning, it's just going to be marking one of those broad categories. It's not going to be something super specific, like you're going to do if you mark it directly in the software. Okay, So starting with the kinds of services, the first one is supportive services. You can see here's the screenshot that shows you the 10 or so specific services that are included under this category. Long story short is when we use the term supportive services, we're talking about services that relate to individual needs rather than educational or programming needs. So things like transportation, childcare, financial counseling, and so on. That is, we're providing some kind of counseling or some kind of service of some kind to the student that basically helps that student improve her or his own personal life, which in turn will make it easier for that student to enroll in class and achieve all these outcomes, rather than providing some sort of training or counseling that directly teaches the student a skill or something related to the program in which they're enrolled. The next type of service is called training service. You can see there's the screenshot that lists the host of services that are included under the training services category. Training services provide more direct, training content to the student, usually focusing on helping them transition to college, transitioning to the world of work, and so on. But there's a lot of different ways where you can provide them some specific skill that will somehow make them more employable or make them more able to access, broader educational services by going to your school and enrolling in that short-term service. Finally, we have transition services. You can see there's the list of transition services in the screenshot. These are more directly related to transitioning to employment, enrolling in college, or enrolling in some sort of pre-employment transition service like Career Tech Ed. And then here's a broader screenshot for the short-term services. In that earlier slide, we had the 6 areas of AB 104 outcomes with all the specific things itemized for those outcomes. Here are the 3 different kinds of services with some examples that relate to each one of those 3 categories for your reference. Okay, moving along here, we're going to get into the TE side. We gave all the background information here in the first section here. We're now going to move into more specific issues related to TE reporting. So before we get into those specific issues, we'll start with the general TE menu. A lot of you looking at this have probably been in TE, so you're at least somewhat familiar with the software. But just to be clear, if you've never really looked in the TE software before, this is a screenshot from the software. To find the specific reports for AEP reporting, we need to go to Reports, State Reports, California. And as you can see from the screenshot, you can see there's, 4 or 5 different reports in the TE software that pertain to the state level reporting there in the top part of that menu. Okay, the first report we're going to spend time discussing, and this is the bread and butter of all AEP reporting, is called the AEP summary. The AEP summary basically summarizes the 7 areas of AEP program. It gives you information about all the areas of AEP outcomes, as well as all the different areas related to short-term services. So just to show you the screenshot, in the left-hand column, you can see there that lists the 7 AEP program areas. So again, for AEP reporting, we have 7 official instructional programs. Again, the 7 programs that the legislature in its infinite wisdom has basically, demarked as the areas for AEP reporting. You can see them here listed on the report, but those areas are ESL, ABE, HSE and high school diploma, CTE, adults with disabilities, adults training for child school success, workforce reentry, and pre-apprenticeship. Those are the official areas of reporting. The legislature has specifically said all of the funding that we do for AEP programming needs to relate to one of those 7 instructional programs. A lot of you probably have programs outside of these 7 areas? If so, that's great. But as far as AEP reporting is concerned, that programming and that financing relate only to the 7 areas as stipulated by the by the state legislature, You can see that reflected here on the AEP summary report. So these are the official areas that we must report on. Looking over, from left to right, we have 3 broad areas of the report that I call simply left-hand section, middle section, right-hand section. To be clear, the left-hand section, literacy gains, I like to say that's a very high bar. The middle section basically gives us all of our other outcomes. That is, those outcomes related to AB 104 that we talked about at the beginning of the training. Basically, all outcomes, other than pre and post testing. And then the right-hand section, or the low bar, that basically refers to short-term services. So starting with the low bar to the right, for short-term services, we've purposefully kept the requirements very, very minimal for services. When you report services, all you really need is a valid student ID and a correctly recorded service. As long as you have that bare minimum information, that will successfully record that short-term service. That is, you do not need to include demographics. You do not need to include hours. You don't even need to include class enrollment or program enrollment for services. Quite frankly, you don't even need to put the person's name in there. Again, as long as you have that ID in there and you correctly record the service, it will get recorded correctly on this AEP report. A lot of you like to put more than that, more than just the ID in there, obviously, but as long as you put the ID in the service, that's all that's required. Anything else you can leave out if you don't have that information. So that gets you in services. Raising the bar a little bit higher in this middle section called AEP Outcomes. Again, these are all of our outcomes. The outcomes are generally a much more significant, a much more significant item than the short-term service. Thereby, it requires program enrollment. It requires class enrollment. It necessarily includes all of the required demographics, such as gender, date of birth, and so on. And it also requires at least 12 hours of instruction, in order to get here. That is, the student must be in class for at least 12 hours in order for them to successfully get one of these AEP outcomes. So again, that middle section requires a higher bar, again requiring class and program enrollment, requiring 12 hours of instruction, and requiring all state and federal demographics in order to get there. Moving to the highest bar, that is the area related to pre and post testing. The short answer is, to get in this left-hand section, the student must meet all of the requirements in the middle section. That is, once again, they must be enrolled in a class. They must be enrolled in one of those 7 official AEP programs. They must have all of those demographics. They must also have 12 hours of instruction. The difference between this left-hand section for pre and post testing and the middle section for all other official AEP outcomes is the left-hand section also requires pre and post testing, for the obvious reason that the left-hand section is the part that specifically pertains to pre and post testing. The middle section with all of those other outcomes does maintain all those other requirements, but it doesn't look in any way, shape, or form at pre or post testing. The only section that requires that are the pre and post gains in this left-hand section. So getting into this, just getting one clarity point for this right-hand section here, we have the area here related to services. So, just to show a difference here, this is the most frequently asked question on the AEP summary, is we have services column M and services column N. This is a major area of confusion, so we make a little extra time to get into this detail. That is, column M is basically summarizing enrollees with any kind of services. Whereas those right-hand columns to the right of M are basically looking at those specific services categories. This causes a lot of confusion overall because column M has a different way of summarizing this than the other right-hand columns do. Column M is basically counting the total number of students, whereas those columns to the right are counting the number of services. So the example below that you can see, we'll just say that the student happens to receive short-term services in both transportation and childcare. I'll just point out intentionally, both of those happen to be in the supportive services category. In that specific example, column M is going to count that once, given that there's one student receiving those supportive services. In that same example, column N is going to be counted twice, given that it's two different services. So again, a lot of you have wanted those two different ways of counting the services. So I'll just reiterate, we did this on purpose. Good news is it counts these services in two different ways. Bad news is yes, it makes it a little bit more confusing. So a little bit more time explaining this gory detail, knowing that this is a very confusing aspect of this report. Okay, moving on. Another very important report in TE is the AEP Data Integrity Report. To be clear, this is in that same state reports menu that we reviewed just a couple slides ago. This one is a very important report because this is the one that you're required to submit with your quarterly data submission. So as most of you know, every quarter we need to make sure that we do an update of our TE data and submit it to the state and submit it to CASAS. The way that we make sure that your data is up to date, number one, and you've completed the requirements each quarter, number two, is you send us a copy of the AEP Data Integrity Report. So this is the one that's kind of a catch-all report that includes a lot of different data elements related to AEP reporting. So you can see here we have 27 different data elements on this report. You might say these 27 elements are all over the map, covering different areas of AEP data collection. Okay, this is way too much information if you're new, so I'll just say don't worry about committing any of this to memory, but just overall what you need to know as a new person is when you're looking at this data integrity report, the single most important aspect, in my opinion, to start understanding this DIR is starting to understand what we call summary information at the very top of the report. The summary information is just an effort on TE's behalf to reconcile all the information you've been collecting for AEP reporting. It's basically looking at, figuring out a way to look at this in one standardized way. So when we look at those 27 different data elements that cover all sorts of different aspects of reporting, we have done so using a uniform denominator to evaluate all 27 items on the report. So making a long story short, we start by casting a wide net. We cast the wide net by starting at looking in the services section. It's not necessarily that the focus needs to be on services, but we start by looking at the services section because, as we said a couple slides ago, the services section, or that right-hand section, is the section that we use that requires by far the lowest level of requirements. So given that it's the lowest level of requirements, we know that that's the section that's going to include the highest number of students. So by casting that wide net, looking at the highest number of students possible, we're just going to collect the total number of students that have any kind of relationship to AEP reporting, period, and that's going to be the number of students in the services section. That's the top row on the screenshot. So not a particularly good example because this example might be a little bit too clean and for its own good, But what we're going to do now is have TE go through a process to throw certain students out. That's represented by the second row. Again, an unusually clean data set where we only have 2 students that we need to throw out. Probably a bad example. Most of you will have a lot more that will need to be thrown out than this. But bottom line is the next step is looking at everybody with any kind of AP activity and filing it down so that it only includes those students that have some kind of enrollment on those 7 AEP programs. So it's going to be weeding out those that don't have hours of instruction. It's going to be weeding out those students that don't have any kind of enrollment in those 7 official programs. So it's going to be looking at it in that aspect. Those students that do not have any kind of AEP program enrollment are going to be weeded out before TE makes any of these calculations across the 27 areas of the data integrity report. So it's going to weed out these 2 individuals. I'll just point out after that we have these 5 rows that are all indented. That's basically going to be 5 more steps that TE takes before settling in on a final answer here for, the denominator of the DIR. What it's doing now is, you might say, it's just TE stopping to smell the coffee. It's definitely eliminating those students not enrolled in the 7 AP programs, but before it officially subtracts those students from these calculations, it's going to stop and smell the coffee and potentially identify students that you might want to double check before you just eliminate them. In this case, it's going to be stopping to show you students that got a job, students that made successful transitions, and so on. That is, it's going to highlight students with outcomes that really resonate strongly here and basically suggest you might want to look at those before just weeding them out of the report. That is, it's the students that have outcomes, the students that you're probably most likely going to want to retain. You'll at least want to double check those students. Then at the end, once it does those calculations, in the end it will have those students enrolled in the 7 official AEP programs. Those students enrolled in the 7 official programs are going to be those ones that we use as the denominator for all 27 items in the DIR. You can see the way it does the math is that little equation at the bottom of this slide. Okay, so now we get into the item description. Again, we have 27 data elements on this report. It'll just give you the instances. So again, in this report, it has, again, I said it's all over the map. It gives you demographics information, hours of instruction, pre and post testing, things related to WIOA Title II federal reporting. Again, it gives you things on AEP outcomes. Again, it's giving you all kinds of information related to things you need to know for AEP reporting. So again, it's listing out these 27 data elements. It's giving you an item count in the middle column and then giving you a percentage in the right-hand column. Again, the percentage is the key thing, and that's what most of you end up caring about. For that percentage to be anything other than garbage, we needed to do all of that accounting at the top of the report. That is so we can ensure we use a uniform denominator when we calculate all 27 percentages for the report. So I'll just reiterate that percentage is represented by that formula that we have in bold, where we're taking that item count and dividing it by that uniform denominator. Number 1 in this example is going to be 1 divided by 237. Number 2 will be 54 divided by 237, and so on. Okay, there's no real uniform bottom line here on which items are more important than others. There's a little bit of eye of the beholder on that. So a lot of you have been looking for a definitive list that shows you which specific items are quote unquote important versus which specific items are quote unquote optional. That's a little bit looser than you think, but I'll just say broadly, I've divided this data integrity report into thirds. For starters, what I call the showstoppers on the data integrity report are items 1 to 10. Items 1 to 10 are the items that include demographics, hours of instruction, pre and post testing. If you have a problem with any of these first 10 items on the DIR, that's a really good, that's a really good possibility then that's a showstopper, and that's preventing students from getting official outcomes and qualifying as an official AEP student. So if you have a problem in items 1 to 10, those are things you generally need to fix right away. On the other hand, items 11 through 22, these are a little bit more like nice to do's. The items 11 through 22 are typically areas that are very important for WIOA Title II federal reporting, but are not necessarily as important when it comes to AEP reporting. So we have things like integrated education and training, periods of participation, co-enrollment with WIOA partners. That is, things that really matter a lot when we look at federal reporting. They're nice to haves for AEP state reporting, but they're not necessarily required. Finally, we have items 23 to 27. You might say this last section of the DIR is the flip side of the middle section, where these are areas that don't really relate to WIOA 2 federal reporting, but they do directly relate to our state reporting for AEP. They're just looking at those 6 areas of AEP AB 104 outcomes, and they're giving you information about who looks to have successfully achieved that outcome versus who looks to have had that checkbox checked or bubbled, but because of some drop reason, usually related to testing, hours of instruction, or student demographics, that student is not presently going to be earning that outcome because some important data element is currently missing. Okay, next, just looking at the rest of these AEP reports and TE, there's another one on barriers to employment. This is another one in that state reports menu, but this is a field we have where you can mark specific categories that may apply to the student. This is borrowed directly from WIOA Title II federal reporting, that is from the feds. So what's happened is the last few years, the feds have identified very specific areas for reporting, areas relating to a student that might make it more difficult for a student to get a job. Perhaps it's not related to get a job, but it just might make it more difficult for the student to participate in and complete your programming period. But anytime you have students that match one of these official card-carrying categories, you want to mark as many as apply. This is something that historically has not really mattered a lot for federal reporting, but in 2016, when we moved out of WIA to WIOA, it's become very important ever since. So the state has adopted that for state reporting as well, and also made this a very important part of our reporting. So just so you know, there's a report here in TE that summarizes all of your students according to barriers to employment. Okay, so moving out of the description of these reports, and at the end here, we'll just have a few minutes of TE mechanical information. Just to be clear, we will not be going through anything that will really succeed in this training that will allow you to get through the mechanical steps in TE all that well. That's a training you really need to do in the lab. The training is called TE Basics Training. I'd strongly encourage you to sign up for some sort of lab-based TE basics training in order to use the software correctly. You're not going to get that successfully from this webinar, but just to show you a couple features, or I should say a couple mechanical features in TE that relate quite a bit to these AEP reports. The first one is a concept called drilling down. Drilling down is the term we've used forever to refer to how in all TE reports, in all of the ones that apply to AEP, all of the ones that apply to state and federal accountability, every single report included in TOPS Pro Enterprise period has the ability to drill down. That is, you can double click any cell with a number in it in any TE report, and that will magically generate a lister of those exact students included in that cell. So for example, this screenshot is showing you that we're going to click on the 102 students currently enrolled in our ESL program. Not so coincidentally, by double clicking that 102, that generates a lister of exactly 102 students. That is the drill down, the drill down advantage. Okay, another thing we've said forever is we've talked about the drill down forever. We've also talked about the ability to right click on those same cells. So the slogan I've used for quite a long time is drilling down is good, right clicking is even better. That is just like you can double click with your mouse and drill down to get more information. You can also right click with your mouse to get information. When you right click to get information, you have several different ways of getting at that same information, usually granting you quite a bit more flexibility than simple double clicking. So here's a screenshot here with the AEP reports. Is generally speaking, you can right click on any cell in any of those AEP reports in TE, and it'll give you 4 different listers and 5 different supplemental reports from which to choose. Let's start with these 4 drill down listers. We gave you the same screenshot with the same illustration of the right clicking, where if you right click on any of these cells, again, it will give you 4 different listers from which to drill down. You can see the 4 different listers are shown here: student program year, population, program population, and record population. Just to give you a brief synopsis, student program years corresponds to the student and program years lister. If you don't know TE that well, you may not know the menu, but just to describe the benefit, the in-program years is just a simple list of everybody with current program year activity. In-program years is how we set the default for the regular double clicking where you do the regular drill down. What I'll just say is that lister is not the most informative lister, but it's the one that we've always set up as the default drill down lister, because that's the one lister where we can guarantee when you click on any of these numbers, the item count in the lister you generate will exactly match the item count that you see on the cell. That is, when we access the 102 learners in ESL, usually we want that lister to equal exactly 102 students, because that's the correct number of students included in that lister. So we double click that 102 and that will give us a lister of exactly 102. So in sum, we want to go to student and program years when we're just interested in verifying that item count. We're not quite ready to make any edits or fixes yet. We just want to make sure we know what we've gotten ourselves into. In this example, we want to know the identities of those 102 students included in that cell. Student population corresponds to the TE demographics lister. That's, of course, where you're going to find fields such as gender, date of birth, race and ethnicity, and so on. So if our suspicion when we're looking at the report is the numbers are a little bit lower than expected, the numbers are a little disappointing, and our suspicion is that's because we have not thoroughly added demographics for all the students, we might want to right-click and drill down to student population and take a look at our demographics lister. This will allow us to look at those same students and verify whether everybody has race and ethnicity, everybody has gender, everybody has date of birth, and so on. And we'll be looking at that lister that includes all those demographics fields, so we can easily verify exactly which students might have some of those demographics fields missing. Nextly, we have student program population. That shows the official program enrollments. So it's going to basically show whether students have enrollment in one of those official AEP programs. By right-clicking and selecting program population, that will give us a list of those same students and show whether that student has program enrollment, and if so, which specific program TE currently shows that student enrolled in. So again, if we look at this report, the number seems a little bit low. Our suspicion is the number is low because we haven't enrolled all our students in one of those official 7 AEP programs. We can right-click and select program population and verify that all the students that are showing up in this report have official program enrollment. Last but not least, we have student record population. That corresponds to the record student records lister. The record student records lister is the TE lister that shows all of those specific outcomes. So it's going to list all of those outcomes that we showed early on under AB 104 and all other outcomes for that matter. So in this example, if we're looking at the report and our number of enrollees and or the number of outcomes is disappointingly low, and our suspicion for why that is because maybe we just haven't marked enough outcomes, we haven't done enough bubbling or box checking or whatever to effectively register all that outcomes for all our students, we might want to right click and select record population to make sure all the students included in that cell have successfully marked all of those official AEP and AB 104 outcomes. Okay, just like we have the different listers for drilling down when we right click, we also have those 5 drilled down reports that we can also access by right clicking. You can see those 5 reports here are on the list we're showing you here. So just going through that list, we have one called NRS Monitor. And again, you're going to need to look at these to get all the details. We're just giving you a basic overview here. But the NRS Monitor kind of gives you everything you wanted to know about each student and more. So it gives you everything but the kitchen sink, you might say. So the NRS Monitor is a good choice to make when you know the number is low, when you know the number on your report is a disappointing number, but you really have no idea what the problem is. You might want to right click and select NRS Monitor. That will give you information about demographics, pre and post testing, instructional hours, and so on. So you can look at all that information related to each student and kind of figure out student by student what might be the problem as to why those numbers are low. Next, we have the Outcomes Monitor and Services Monitor. Those are both there to give you more details about, the numbers. Bottom line is when you're looking at these reports, whether it's the DIR outcome summary, all of these numbers related to outcomes and related to services are going to be aggregated by category. If you want to look at specific types of outcomes and or specific types of services, you need to look at either the Outcomes Monitor or Services Monitor. So if you want to get a little deeper in the weeds and find out specifically which outcomes in those categories of AB 104 or which specific services across those 4 categories of services, you need to drill down and look more specifically at the Outcomes or Services Monitor. Assessments audit, that's a very, very, very detailed report. If you're having trouble with your literacy gain section, or pre-post section, I should say, if those numbers are disappointing and you feel like maybe you've tested your students incorrectly and or you haven't done enough testing to get pre-post outcomes, you can right-click and select Assessments Audit. That will show you everything you ever wanted to know and more about all your AEP students and everything as it relates to pre- and post-testing. Finally, you can also right-click and access the Data Integrity Report. The benefit there is it will give you that Data Integrity Report for just the subset for which you right-clicked. So whenever you're running the Data Integrity Report for quarterly reporting, or whenever you're running it to get an overview of everything related to your agency, obviously you'd want to run that Data Integrity Report directly from the TE menu. But by right-clicking and selecting AEP DIR, that will give you the DIR for the subset. So sticking with the example we've been talking about, you could right-click on that number 102 in the screenshot that reflects your total number of ESL learners, select AEP DIR, and in that example, it'll show your DIR just for those 102 students in ESL, rather than showing your DIR for your entire agency population. That is, you can get all those gory details related to the DIR and look at just that smaller number of students. That is weeding out some of the clutter. You can focus just on specific information in that report. Okay, last but not least, last couple minutes of this training, we also have consortium manager reports. So to be clear, if you're interested in accessing reports at the consortium level, you need to contact CASAS. I'll just say anecdotally, about half the consortia statewide have contacted us and accessed this level of reporting. About half the consortia statewide have not done this. So if you suspect that your consortium has not yet done this, you need to email cape@casas.org. That is, you need to email caep@casas.org, cape@casas.org. That's the email where you can email us at CASAS, and you can get a login account at the consortium level rather than the agency level. So just to make sure this is easily understood, all of you have access to TE, but your access to TE is for your individual agency, not your AEP consortium. So a couple years ago, we have reports that give you information at the consortium level. That is, it will aggregate the data across all the agencies included in your AEP consortium, rather than only giving you information for your individual agency. So strength and weakness, I just gave you the advantage of this level, where it will give you the numbers for all reports, not just your own agency. The disadvantage to this level of reporting is it will not allow you to drill down. Completely intentional. We allow the drill down, capabilities at the agency level, but again, we intentionally disallow those capabilities at the consortium level because of things like HIPAA and FERPA and all that kind of stuff. We do not want consortium level, access to enable you to drill down and get that student level information. We purposefully enforce the idea that you need to be at the agency level to get that more detailed student level access. But again, email caep@casas.org, and that will allow you to access these 3 different reports that give you the data results at the consortium level rather than just the agency level. So we have the demographic summary, we have the AEP summary, and we have barriers to employment. Here's the demographic summary, where again it will give all of those demographics fields in TE and basically give you a breakdown for each agency in your consortium. Here's a bigger, broader view so you can see it more clearly, where this example basically shows you highest diploma. It'll list by agency, give you the item count and percentage. It'll give you that item count and percentage for each agency. And then in gray over to the right, it will give you your aggregated numbers for your entire consortium. It also gives you the same information for the AEP summary. It also gives you the same information for barriers to employment. I give these 2 reports a little more short shrift, not because the demographics is any more important, but the demographic summary does have a little niftier look. I'll just point out the demographic summary. We're able to line up all the agencies in your consortium side by side and let you do the compare and contrast on one piece of paper. Bottom line is both the AEP summary and the barriers employment reports are both way too busy for that sort of display, so you just necessarily have to get a separate page for each agency in your consortium when you run these 2 reports. But bottom line is it will give you the consortium level information and give you a separate report for each agency in your consortium to also facilitate that compare and contrast. So again, that's all the slides here in this presentation. Just to summarize, we looked at the AEP outcomes, focusing specifically on the 6 areas of the California State AB 104 legislation. We looked a little bit at those short-term services. Again, the outcomes are longer-term outcomes like employment, transition, and pre-post literacy gains. The services are usually less significant, shorter-term things provided by just an hour or two of counseling or short-term training. We looked at all of that stuff in the first half, giving you explanation of what all those outcomes and what all those services mean from a from a programmatic point of view. Then in the second half, we focused on the specific reports included inside TE. We looked at the agency level reports in TE, gave you an overview of some of the specific TE mechanical features that are helpful in reviewing those reports. And then finally, we looked at your ability to access consortium level reports. So if you're the consortium manager, you can look at data across all the agencies in your consortium instead of looking at just the information in your specific agency. So on that overview, I'll turn it back over to Liberty, and I'll just say thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jay. This was a great webinar, and I appreciate your presentation today. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar is available online on the California Adult Education website. And I also want to remind you that if there is a need for technical assistance or professional development, please contact TAP. And thank you, and have a great rest of your day.